everyone. My name is Wendy Killian, and I'll be your MC for the day. On behalf of my colleagues at Advancement Project California, it's my honor to welcome all of you to our second virtual edition of the Champions for Equity Awards. Thank you for being here. Be sure to use the chat to share your name and the city you're joining us from. Power Pivot is tonight's theme as it reflects what our staff and partners are doing and have been doing before and in the midst of a global pandemic and economic recession. And that is to ensure equity for all Californians. This means we are finally reconnecting with loved ones after 18 months of isolation and uncertainty. Finding our way forward through the grief and loss many of us have suffered, holding on to the power that many of our communities have gained, ensuring that the billions of recovery dollars coming to communities stays where it's needed the most. And finally, it means pushing past the noise and lies that sow chaos and division. Solidarity is the only way forward if we truly want a California that works for all of us, regardless of your race, economic status, or zip code. I'd like to take a moment, though, to recognize that some of us have been able to pivot more easily than others. Some of us have been able to work, teach our kids, take telehealth visits, and buy groceries from the safety and security of one's home. To the grassroots organizers and the frontline workers who made sure we had groceries, our families had health care, and our kids were getting educated, we thank you. We recognize the sacrifices you have made, and we want you to know that we support you. We are so glad that you all are joining us today. Please use the chat throughout the show to let us know what you think about the program and speakers, and share your ideas about the Power Pivot California needs to make. So let me take a moment to thank our generous sponsors, many of whom support us year after year. With your support, we've already raised over $160,000. Thank you, thank you. And we're not done, because we're never really done raising money for Advancement Project California. So throughout the evening, you'll see not so subtle reminders about how you can support our essential racial equity work across California. Just follow the steps on your screen to make that donation. Now let's get this virtual party started. First up, you'll hear from our Executive Director, John Kim. And then John will be in conversation with 3 of our labor partners, lifting up the heroism and hardship of frontline workers, including those in the retail, health, and education fields. We've also got a very special musical performance from Sankofa. And throughout the program, you'll also hear equity victory highlights from Advancement Project California staff on our work and impact over the last year. And kicking us off is my colleague, Jackie Guerrero.
Hello, I'm Jackie Guerrero, the Director of Equity and Community Investments team. Our team analyzes local government budgets and policies to find openings for racial equity. We do this by teaming up with local leaders to secure funding and win policies as defined by their local community residents. Since early in the pandemic, Advancement Project California has tracked the racially disparate impacts of COVID-19 cases, deaths, PPE distribution, and access to testing and vaccines through our Race Counts data portal. Most recently, we created the COVID-19 Vulnerability and Recovery Index to determine where the communities most hurt by the pandemic live. And as you may know, the Biden administration passed the American Rescue Plan Act in March of this year. And this rescue plan directed $1.9 billion to the Los Angeles County with very little restrictions on its use. So we used the index to figure out where those funds were needed the most across the county. And we learned that the highest need communities on the index have lower insurance rates and are more likely to live in overcrowded housing units compared to communities in the lowest need categories. Some of these highest need communities include places like Boyle Heights, Florence and Firestone, Maywood, and Willowbrook. So we reached out to our community partners, Community Coalition, Inner City Struggle, SEIU Local 2015, and together we jumped into action. After an intense campaign, the Board of Supervisors unanimously passed a motion directing the county departments to allocate the rescue plan funding in an equitable way. That's great, right? Except the problem is the county did not have the systems in place to equitably allocate these funds. Fortunately, the motion allowed the county's newest unit, the Anti-Racism, Diversity, and Inclusion Initiative, to develop this missing system. By mid-September, the board voted unanimously to adopt the motion's recommendations for an equity funding formula, equity principles, and transparency requirements that will clearly guide the distribution of these rescue plan funds. The formula calls for 75% of the $1.9 billion to go to the highest need communities. That's incredible, right? And what this means is that even beyond this huge $1.9 billion victory, the county now has the tools to determine how to allocate funds equitably so that in the future funding can reach the people and neighborhoods that need it the most. This win begins to dismantle the divide equally approach that typically shapes government policy, but is so harmful to communities of color who have historically been disinvested and over-policed. Beverly Hills does not need the same supports and help that Bell Garden does. And this policy embraces this reality. So we want to thank Supervisor Holly Mitchell and her team, who deserve a lot of credit for moving this forward. And we want to thank our partners who use their advocacy skills and work to mobilize the community and policymakers to support this important policy. And we want to thank you, Advancement Project California supporters, for providing the unrestricted funding that allowed us to dive into this work at the exact right time that it was needed. Thank you so much.
Afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for what I hope will be the last fully virtual Champions for Equity event. There's just so much going on, happening all at once, that I'm glad that we're able to take a moment to celebrate the work and to celebrate the heroes and sheroes in our movement and give them some of their due shine. For our honorees, when you spend any time at Fresno, you could feel a sense of what's always been, but what's also ready to be birthed, which is why I'm so happy that we're able to celebrate a couple of the matrons of the new Fresno, the Fresno that's to be, Kimberly and Sandra. I'm happy that we'll be able to celebrate their amazing work around Measure P, which will not only change the physical landscape of Fresno, but also will change how we're thinking about local revenue measures around the state. I also look forward to the conversation we have planned with some of the most powerful labor leaders in the state. But before I proceed, let me acknowledge someone very special to the AP California family that will be moving on to an extraordinary new opportunity. Carla Plates Howell has been with us for 7 years and was absolutely instrumental in helping Wendy and I and the entire team to create the current version of this organization. It's hard to see her go, but amazing to see her take on a new role in overseeing the Childcare and Development Division for the California Department of Social Services. As you'll hear from my colleagues throughout this program, this past year has been about managing both a tactical defense and a strategic offense when it comes to racial justice in the time of COVID. With our partners, there have been times when we just had to hold the line. And at other times, we've had to stand ready to push farther than we ever thought possible. It's a bit overwhelming when you stop to think about the full scope of what the racial justice movement has won or put into motion over the past 18 months. And in the midst of all of it was the recall election. I know many are trying to get past it quickly to act like it didn't happen, but frankly, I think it's a helpful reminder to all of us, albeit an expensive one, but reminded us that when it comes to California politics, you always have to plan for a bit of chaos and a bit of crazy. And that above and beyond whatever is happening at the political class level in this state, the ever-growing power of multiracial community organizing groups is the real story there. And in the end, no matter how far we think we've come in our state, we need to remember that our opposition is always right there, always right waiting, right below the surface. One of the most galling yet long-standing hallmarks of our opposition is that they've always promoted policies that in actuality hurt the majority of their constituents, whether in the form of economic exploitation, the loss of social supports, or the chipping away of democratic control to autocrats, they have mastered the art of getting their base to vote against their own interests. But this latest right-wing positioning around anti-masking and anti-vaccinations has taken this to an entirely new level. Rarely have we seen a political position cause such an immediate detrimental impact on its proponents. Every community where the right wing has ginned up their misinformation war against humanity, you see COVID hospitalizations and COVID deaths skyrocket in this latest surge. All without fail, and all of it completely preventable. It's been difficult to watch this hyper-cannibalistic form of politics ravage communities here in California, and of course, frightening to see its ripple effects spreading throughout the state. And this isn't about masks. And it's certainly not about the sanctity of one's own bodies, because it's the same people that are cheering on the medieval anti-choice policies in places like Texas. What is clear is that all of these zombie-like political positions are animated by their fear of and hatred of people of color and the inclusive democracy we are all trying to build. Their racial animosity runs so deep that they're willing to lay their own well-being and their lives to the altar of hate. Yeah, it's our job to call out the lunacy when we see it, to do all we can to push back against the politics of grievance. But we also have to retain our ability to play both offense and defense, as I've said. We have to be careful not to take the bait and let them goad us to their level, because in the end, we have a much bigger job here in California. We need to be clear at this moment that the opposite of the right is not just the left. The opposite of the right is for us to move forward. And if we do our jobs correctly, where we win our campaigns, ensure things are properly implemented, and Californians actually start to feel the impact of our work, then we might be telling a new American story. Not one of manifest destiny or a white savior to the savage world, but a story where it's those that were treated the least in this country, people of color and our allies, that in the end will be the saviors of our democracy. Not simply because we won some electoral battle, but because we have a better vision for the future and we're willing to put in the hard work to actually get there. So let me end with this. There's a part of me that also thinks that this anti-vax and anti-masking hype is about changing the conversation. Because at the onset of the pandemic, when things were at their darkest and society was at its barest, it became clear to everyone who was actually essential. It became clear that it was essential workers that kept the lights on and the food on the table, that cared for our elderly and educated our children. And for a moment, America actually stood unified on who our real heroes were. And there was this potential to open up new solidarities and new paths for power shifting. But that kind of clarity and those solidarities were a fundamental threat to the right's politics of division and extraction. And so they needed to change the conversation. But I learned a long time ago that when someone's got your back, you better make sure to have theirs when the time comes. And so we refuse to let them change the channel. We'll continue to honor what essential workers did for us in the darkest of days. And even more importantly, we at Advancement Project California are deepening our commitment to stand in solidarity with them and to support them in their fight for a safe and dignified workplace through this pandemic and beyond. So in that vein, let me transition to a conversation with those representing some of the most essential of essential workers in our state and region. So today we're joined by three of the most impactful labor leaders in the state. So let's start with some introductions. April Verrett, President SEIU 2015. April and I have been on this road together for some time now, and I can't tell you how much I've benefited from her wisdom and support. Also, it's been great to be able to share a laugh every now and then. Thank you for coming in, April. Cecily Meyer-Cruz, President of United Teachers Los Angeles, someone I'm just getting to know, but from afar, I've been in awe of the grace and power in which she's moved into her leadership and taken on some of the most challenging times faced by public education in generations. And John Grant, President UFCW 770, a longtime labor leader and warrior for justice in all quarters. I'm always honored to share space with you, sir. So thank you all for coming in. So for all three of you, again, for making the time and coming to speak to us, you know, sometimes it's hard to think back on those opening days of the pandemic. But for me, one of the most indelible memories is the sense of gratitude for the essential workers that really kept us moving. I remember venturing out after a few days to try to get some supplies for the family and seeing at the grocery store these workers overwhelmed, but calmly, safely making sure that everybody got what they needed. I remember teachers managing their own trauma, what must be their own trauma, managing their own family dynamics in the background, but still trying to create a nurturing and welcoming space for my kids. And hearing the stories of home healthcare workers that were doing everything they could to keep their patients safe and healthy. And I always wondered, that must have come at some cost to those workers. And so if you could tell us just a little bit about, you know, what it was like for the workers that you represented in those opening days of the pandemic. And so maybe I could start with you, April.
As I reflect back on the early days of the pandemic and just how much we did not know, how home care workers and nursing home workers continue to do the work that they do every single day, going into people's homes, going into skilled nursing facilities, giving care. And what we found out is that they themselves were carriers in many cases of the virus. And the tremendous weight and toll I feel that that has taken on our workers is something we don't talk a lot about. They did not mean to put anyone in harm's way, but what we know now is that they just may have. And I think the emotional and mental weight of caregivers, them putting themselves in harm's way, putting the folks that they care for in harm's way, and their families in harm's way is going to be something we have to pack and deal with that trauma, not just for caregivers, but for essential workers across the gamut. We just knew so very little, and we made all of the allowances in the world for those who could stay home and shelter in place to do so safely, but we did not give enough care and attention to the people who couldn't. And so hopefully we will learn from those lessons.
That's right. And, you know, for parents of students in the classroom, we don't often get to see actually their teachers do their job. But because of Zoom technology, we're actually able to hear these teachers do their work. And I was blown away by the quality and care in which they showed up. But again, the sacrifices. What were the sacrifices for some of the folks that you represented, Cecily?
Our educators did a yeoman's job during this horrific global pandemic. They flipped their classrooms and workspaces overnight. These same educators stepped up to the plate in significant ways. And when I reflect back on it, there's this idea floating in the ethos that educators stopped working during this pandemic. And that couldn't be more further from the truth. Since the start of this pandemic and endless stay-at-home orders, our educators stepped into action. They learned how to teach on a platform that we're using today, no one even heard of. They learned how to engage students over the internet, how to work with parents and the entire educational community to keep our babies safe, educated, and empowered at a time when despair was running rampant. Our students of color had to deal with dueling pandemics, and I want to make sure that folks actually understand that COVID-19 was wreaking havoc, but also there were calls during that time for racial and social justice. And those dueling pandemics made them more strong, made more informed citizens, and were able to bring and manage traumas that were born out of these dueling pandemics.
I appreciate you lifting up this idea about the racial disparities. And one thing that I feel like we are losing sight of is that COVID-19 did not create the racial disparities. COVID-19 just flowed along the racist landscape that we already had been building here for generations, and unfortunately landed on way too many of the highest need, hardest hit communities already. And so again, what the teachers had done for all of those communities as well is something that we always have to lift up and honor. So thank you so much. And Mr. Grant, in terms of commercial food workers, again, those are probably folks that we got to see under duress, right? In terms of people going out there and just trying to get, unfortunately, it was a run on toilet paper at first, but also food and just trying to make sure they had the nourishment that their families needed. And so if you could tell us a little bit about what those openings days felt like for you and your workers.
It was a medical Katrina that came to rest inside each of these stores. And there's probably wasn't, I don't think there was another public gathering place other than a grocery store where people came during this period of when it all was locked down. And so fear, vulnerability, infection, disease, and death. And then as times got worse, physical assault and battery, both from, trying to get the needed supplies and the toilet paper, but even later as sort of this right wing became a right-wing tribal battleground about not wearing masks, not observing social distancing, doing whatever the hell they wanted, physically assaulting clerks for wearing a mask. And they work tirelessly, as you said, without breaks, 7 days a week. The companies denied them protocols. They did not even want them to wear masks because they thought that might create a panic, as if this stuff wasn't going on anyway. And then they began to figure out, how do we solve this problem? And we had town halls of over 16,000 workers call in with the solutions, because as we know, those closest to the problem are best able to provide the solutions. And that's what the testing, the protocols, all this in large part came from workers saying, no, this is what needs to happen. Frankly, I'm so proud of the workers. They were ahead of the CDC in terms of what was necessary to protect our communities. And at this point, worker health and safety was equated to public health and safety.
Yeah. Thank you all for sharing these stories. I think it's one thing to applaud the heroes. It's another thing to recognize their humanity and, unfortunately, the trauma that they had to carry for us, and to make sure that we don't just applaud and move on, but that we help and address some of this that's going to be, unfortunately, an ongoing mental health issue for all of us, but particularly those that were on the front line. So thank you again for sharing that story. But John, to something that you mentioned, just to move on to the second question, we do know that the name of the game for the opposition is about sowing division and grievance and separation. And they've gotten really good and very, very disciplined at finding and inflaming all those false choices, all those fault lines. And while they sort of move and shout and scream about masks and snake oil and voting audits, they make sure that we pay less attention to the pillaging that they're doing of our pocketbooks and our lands. And so as we've seen them play this out, even in the context of a global pandemic, even in the context when we were all so kicked down as a society, they played out this game. What do we on the left have to learn? What do we need to get more disciplined about how we show up, and not just push back, but how we lead? And so maybe, April, if I can start with you on this question about what does it look like for us moving forward? How do we not just fight back, but actually lead?
Yeah, it's a great question, John, and I have lots of thoughts about this. But during the course of this conversation, I am remembering something I heard the amazing Heather McGhee say a couple of weeks ago. And if you haven't read Heather's latest book, I encourage you to, The Sum of Us. She talked about government and organized labor being the two entities that can hold power and be able to stand in the gap of what she describes as the plantation owner class, that the heirs of the plantation owner class, that those two entities together, government and unions, is what we got. Yep. And it is not lost on me that what the opposition has done is made us hate as a whole, both government and unions.
Yep.
And so I think one of the things we have to get better about is being relentless and holding up the truth about who we are as unions.
Cecily, words of wisdom in terms of how we move forward, given who we have as opposition and the landscape we have in front of us.
We talked about COVID, and COVID laid bare all of the inequities. We live in the 5th largest global economy in the world, but still in our Black and brown communities, we still are under-enrolled. Disinvestments exist, right? We haven't said that this is what we need to do. We've got to have material conditions of our most fragile babies changed. And that means it's for our whole educational community. And all of us could have a helping hand in that. We want to make sure that our students are living up to and doing what is necessary, but the conversation has to be on greater investments that comes from the government, that comes from Sacramento, and we've got to fight together on that. We believe in the power of togetherness. We believe in the power of unions, and we believe in our young scholars. And if we are actually saying that together in unison with one voice, then there is nothing that we can't do.
I hear you, Cecily, that we got to do that together. And so, John, what else? What else is in the mix here? What else do we have to think about as we move forward? We could go with that. I appreciate that, but I'm sure there's something you want to add on top of it.
Our movements give us the chance to change a tragedy into change. You know, that has the potential. And for us, I think what came out of this similarly is the question of empowering workers. Our workers on their own, at the risk of being fired and some were suspended, stopped, closed the doors, and refused to allow more people in to enable social distancing. They would stop work and sanitize themselves and their check stand. They would stop work if somebody wasn't wearing a mask. They would stop work if somebody was being, we had workers attacked with Nazi salutes, rammed with shopping carts, and workers stood up and said, you know what? Forget it. We're not working anymore. That right of health and safety empowerment has to be given to workers, but bring that voice that we have in the community to that voice to work.
So I go from a space of carrying gratitude for what you all and the workers you represent did for my family, for our communities. But I come out of this conversation also feeling this idea that even though the pandemic pushed us into this isolation and this question about social distancing, it made very clear, though, how tied we are together, how integrated this actually is. It's not just a teacher movement or a home care worker movement or a racial justice movement or a worker movement. These are all inextricably tied together, and we've allowed ourselves in some ways, and I'm going to speak mostly for myself at this point, to stay separated, when in the end, the big fight is not just against the opposition, but to make sure that we kind of bring ourselves together so that we can all kind of move together. And with that, I just, again, given everything that you guys have on your calendars, everything that you have on your plates, the fact that you would come out here and have this conversation with us, thank you so much for taking the time, for sharing the stories, and for pointing the way about where we really need to be moving as we think about not only this year, but the next decade, the next generation for our movement. So thank you all for making the time, and I hope to see you all in person sometime soon.
Thanks, John. If I may paraphrase the great quote, let us mourn together for all that we have lost, all those that we have lost, and fight like hell for the living.
Fight like hell. There you go. All right, thank you so much, and have a good afternoon.
I'm John Dobard, Managing Director of Policy and Programs. For 7 years, I led our political participation work. That work starts from the understanding that for too long, low-income people of color have been deliberately excluded from political power. When people think of political power, most jump straight to voting, which is unquestionably important to participating in our democracy. But at Advancement Project California, we broaden our view to focus on the other ways that all Californians can participate. In 2020 and 2021, this focus has been all about census and redistricting because they are important parts of a 10-year civic engagement cycle. And both have huge impacts on our ability to have candidates that actually represent and are responsive to us. The census is the one activity in our democracy in which everyone can participate, regardless of voter status or citizenship. Quite literally, everyone counts. We began working on the census as far back as 2016 because of its importance to political representation and the allocation of billions of dollars in government funding for health, education, housing, and other programs. We brought together the Census Policy Advocacy Network, or CPAN, to accomplish two goals: to ensure that hard-to-count populations in California were accurately counted, primarily by increasing self-response rates, and to build power in grassroots organizations through the process. Although the usual census outreach strategies were taken from us due to the COVID-19 pandemic, California still exceeded its 2010 self-response rate. We also mobilized diverse grassroots organizations to get involved in census outreach, including the Council on American Islamic Relations California, the California Native Vote Project, and the Partnership for the Advancement of New Americans. Now, the next step, redistricting. California is leading the nation once again because we have a redistricting commission that draws lines based on what the community says and not backroom deals between politicians. This is a unique opportunity to draw legislative districts that truly represent the people who live in those districts. The voters choosing their elected officials instead of the other way around. Because census data was released later than usual, the redistricting process is also pushed. We are deep in the process of mobilizing and educating residents on how best to add their voices to the decision-making process. We have convened a statewide redistricting alliance of power-building organizations to ensure racial equity is one of the key determining factors in how the lines are drawn. Two groups make this challenging work possible. One group is our community-based partners who have persevered through enormous difficulties. The pandemic, attacks on our communities, attacks on our democracy, to ensure every Californian is represented. The other is you. The flexible funding from thousands of our supporters make it possible for us to jump into this quickly changing, evolving work and make it a success. Thank you for your support.
Hey, 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 hey. Hey. Hey, 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 hey. Black excellence, black beauty, and black pride. Black power from all diasporas coincide. When the truth and regression eventually collide, and the beauty of the people no longer be set aside. May the black queen's grace continually mesmerize millions who couldn't see it, looking into her eyes. And the black man's plight no longer be the disguise. Oppression and emasculation, they want to castricize and take him away from the black queen, put him inside prison for slave labor, institutionalized. Wondering on the outside, is she willing to ride? Is she willing to ride? Is she willing to fight for the love, even despite fact that he doing time? Love that conquers all will never fade with time. If she don't choose the love that appreciates every life, his flame might get dim, may eventually die. Even more so, she maybe will hear a cry of a child not knowing the beauty of what's inside. The black man be continually penalized. The black child need the village to raise them right. My black queens hold it together, try not to cry. I heard Gloria say it, I know that we will survive. Said the black man be continually penalized. Black child need the village to raise them right. Black queens hold it together, try not to cry. I heard Gloria say it, I know that we will survive. I know that we will survive, know that we will survive. Had to say it 3 times, wanna re-emphasize. Look in the mirror and see the beauty in every mind. All created equal, but all don't recognize, man, we awfully understand. Pray that you realize that they awfully say they saying what's real when it's realized. I'm in awfully understanding the truth with my real eyes. All people are beautiful, but you best know my people are beautiful. And although we know it, we still have to remind a generation of us that they always leave behind. Before they curse you out, degrade you, will come at your grind. Understand the beauty of strength and resilience in your spine. May the black queen's grace continually mesmerize. Black gene traits no longer be fetishized. Beautiful king and queen will eventually rise. Nappy black hair, dark skin, and brown eyes. The true face of beauty you better recognize. The black man be continually penalized. Black child lead the village to raise them right. Black queens hold it together, never cry. Got her glory said, know that we will survive. Said the black man be continually penalized. Black child lead the village to raise them right. Black queens hold it together, try not to cry. I heard Gloria said, know that we will survive. Let me be. I just want to be me. I just want to be free. I just want liberty, equity, and democracy. I just want to believe in the good of society. I just want to believe that they ain't been lying to me. I want equality, want no more poverty. I want people to tell you it's more black people in jail for committing crimes that blacks and whites are committed equally. I want the corporate interest to crumble before my feet. I want them to stop selling your rights to powers that be. I want a third term for Obama, we'll never see. No Democrat, no Republican, me, I want unity. I want the righteous voice speaking to my community. Don't listen to what they say, you look at what they say to see. Want you to know the truth, but for that you will have to seek. Want you to know the truth, but for that you will have to seek. Wanna remain meek, I wanna remain me, I wanna remain black man, be forever revitalized. Black child, heed the village, you'll be alright. Black queens hold it together and never die. And the legacy of a people forever is on the rise. Said the black man be forever revitalized. Black child, heed the village, you'll be alright. Black queens hold it together and never die. And the legacy of a people forever is on the rise. Black man be forever revitalized. Black child, heed the village, you'll be alright. Black queens hold it together and never die. And the legacy of a people forever is on the rise. Hey, now if you and me sing, eh, 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 yeah. Hey, 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 like eh, 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 yeah. Hey, 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 yeah, yeah. Hey, hey, like eh, 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 yeah. Hey, hey. Sankofa, eh, 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 yeah. Be excellent. Black man be forever revitalized. Black child heed the village, you'll be alright. Black queens hold it together and never die. And the legacy of a people forever is on the rise. Shout out to each and every one of you for supporting the Champions for Equity Awards. And shout out to the Advancement Project California for serving our communities all across the state of California in racial and economic justice for over 20 years. We love you all, and we thank you for your support. Make sure you give a donation. This is K. Sankofa. Be excellent.
Wow, what a great program so far. How incredible was K. Sankofa? He's both a talented musician and a tremendous colleague. Thank you, Kenneth Cole, AKA K. Sankofa. Thank you. And John Kim is not only my boss, he's also someone that I've come to count on to help me navigate these ever-changing and all too often heartbreaking times we live in. I don't know about you, but that conversation with our 3 labor partners has helped me better understand the tremendous sacrifices our essential workers have made for all of us and how I can be in better solidarity with them. Remember, you can add your voice to the Power Pivot in another way. Please make a donation from your phone or other device. And now it's time to present this afternoon's award, followed by a short film about a wonderful childcare provider and our last equity victory story. Advancement Project California is so proud to present the 2021 Transformative Partner Award to Sandra Celedon and Kimberly McCoy from Fresno Building Healthy Communities. For many years, Sandra and Kimberly, along with committed Fresno residents, have advocated for more park space and investments in parks. Did you know that 8 in 10 Fresno parks are dilapidated, run down, and downright dangerous? When talking to policymakers failed to achieve results, Sandra and Kimberly decided to take it to voters in November 2018 through a ballot measure, Measure P. The measure proposed a small sales tax to generate $37.4 million annually for the next 30 years for parks and cultural arts in Fresno. After a hard-fought campaign by a broad coalition of Fresno residents, Measure P passed with 52% of the vote. Victory, right? Not quite. The powers that be tried to deny the people's voice by claiming that the measure needed to pass with a 2/3 majority. This was, as you can imagine, a gut punch to Measure P supporters. But it was the youth who pushed back hard and rallied the adults to keep up the fight. Organizers sued, claiming that because community members placed the initiative on the ballot, as opposed to elected officials, that a simple majority was enough for victory. In early 2021, an appellate court ruled in favor of the suit, and the state Supreme Court declined to hear the case. That means the ruling stands and Measure P is now being enacted. Most of the funding is for park maintenance, but funding also supports new park development, cultural and youth services and programming, urban trails, and senior services. And Kimberly sits on the commission overseeing the implementation of these funds. The pandemic has shown us all how important safe outdoor spaces are for health, community, and quality of life. As Kimberly has said, parks are a symbol that lasts for generations. They outlive us, but are there for our children and their children. And this victory lives on in other ways. The court ruling that community-led ballot initiatives need only a simple majority has made it possible for activists across the state to more easily make transformative change in their communities. For all of this and so much more, we are thrilled to present the Transformative Partner Award to Sandra Celedon and Kimberly McCoy from Fresno Building Healthy Communities. Please join me in welcoming them.
Thanks, Wendy. On behalf of Fresno Building Healthy Communities, I am honored to receive this award for our young people, for all of the Fresnans that have led, have fought to ensure that parks in our community receive the investment and the attention that they need and deserve. I'm so honored to be able to work alongside leaders like Kim and the thousands of Fresnans that elevated parks in our community as a priority, that took it upon themselves not just to collect signatures, but to write out a measure, and who brought parks to the forefront in our community, even when those in power didn't agree. And more importantly, I'm really proud of the fact that Fresno Building Healthy Communities, alongside all of our community members and community residents, fought for democracy to ensure that the voices of the many are valued, are heard, and that actions are implemented. I'm so honored to be able to receive this award on behalf of the community of Fresno, on behalf of the Central Valley, to acknowledge all of the hard work for the past decade. And I'm especially honored to be able to work alongside folks like Kim, who led the work on the ground, who championed all of the field work, not just for Measure P, but all of the work leading up to Measure P, and really is an example of what happens when we allow community members who are the experts to lead. So thank you again for this recognition, and I'm sure Kim will share more about the work that she's been doing and leading and how excited we are to continue this work in Fresno.
Thank you, Sandra. I am so honored to receive this award. This was a hard-fought campaign for us, but 52% of the residents registered voters spoke to have better parks in their community. I could not have done this without Sandra trusting me with the field work. I had an excellent team. We were a very diverse team, from the old to the young, And we went out there and we hit the pavement hard, knocking on doors, having conversations with residents of how important it is to have more investment in our parks. And this is a perfect example how you organize people, you organize resources to help shape public policy. And that's exactly what Measure P did. And for everyone that's out there, remember that your voice is your power. You have the right to want more in your community. You have the right to have a say-so on what goes on in your community and what's placed in your community. Your voice is your power. Use it, please.
And I'd also like to thank and acknowledge the Advancement Project and your staff who has been working right alongside with us and community members here in Fresno. We wouldn't be able to do this work without the training and the support that you've offered over the years to understand how to engage in budget advocacy, how community members can ensure that their priorities and their desires are reflected in not just expenditure plans, but being able to write their own measure. And so I want to acknowledge and thank the Advancement Project for your years of partnership with Fresno Building Healthy Communities, supporting the work in the Central Valley. And we look forward to our continued partnership for many years to come. And so we're excited to be part of this event today. And we ask for folks to make sure to contribute to the Advancement Project to continue to do the great work across the state of California until we ensure that all voices and all people are valued and included in our democratic system. And of course, that means for folks in Fresno that not only do we have a more inclusive, robust community, but in our case, a greener community with more and better parks for everyone. So thank you again. We really appreciate this acknowledgement and we appreciate your partnership.
For 20 plus years, Advancement Project California has worked to lift the importance of early care and education. Home-based childcare providers are a core part of ensuring a good start in life for our youngest Californians.
Estamos apoyando a todas las personas esenciales para que puedan seguir progresando nuestro país.
As an essential worker, I really do appreciate the time they take to care for my kids. Sometimes my shifts are very long, 12 hours. Sometimes I have to work 16-hour shifts. And so knowing that there's someone there caring for them, someone that I can trust, is definitely important for me.
So I'm just thankful that I have the care here at Esperanza's daycare, and I'm pretty sure that other parents feel the same way, because without the daycare providers, we wouldn't be who we are, or we wouldn't be able to do anything.
Anteriormente siempre hemos sido esenciales para varios padres de familia, ¿sí? Porque tienen que trabajar, tienen que estudiar.
I would say childcare is essential for me, because without childcare, I wouldn't be able to provide for my family. I wouldn't be able to work the long hours that I do. I wouldn't be able to pick up the extra shifts.
Entonces, para mí también es una gran satisfacción poder apoyar a los papás.
Esperanza was the person that noticed my daughter's speech delay. She's the one that referred me to the regional center, and then from there I started taking my daughter to speech therapy.
Mi experiencia también como proveedora de cuidado de niños, he aprendido a identificar cuando un niño tiene una necesidad especial.
By the age of 2, Gianni wasn't really saying much. He would just point and cry and have tantrums, and Esperanza was able to catch that. My children's progress has been amazing for Mila and Gianni, especially Gianni, receiving therapy here.
Y ahora me quedo sorprendida de todo lo que habla el niño.
He went from saying 0 words to being bilingual.
Para mí es importante que los niños aprendan a hablar español y inglés.
So it's very important for my children to be bilingual, because I come from a Mexican family where not everyone is able to speak English. My parents only speak Spanish.
Because that's part of who we are. It's our root. I feel like that's very important for her to grow up and have that with her.
Y para mí esa es una gran satisfacción, ver que los niños pueden, si uno les da las herramientas necesarias, el mundo lo van a tener abierto para ellos.
Hello, I'm Vicki Ramos-Harris, Director of Educational Equity. Too often, a child's zip code determines their access to quality education and life outcomes. And so we disrupt these inequities by prioritizing investments in low-income children and families and communities of color. We collaborate with community partners, elected leaders, and policymakers to design a birth to 12th grade education system that supports all students, particularly our communities of color. For years, we have been a part of the Equity Alliance for LA's Kids, alongside Community Coalition, Inner City Struggle, and the Partnership for LA Schools, advocating together for LA Unified School District to prioritize funding for our highest need students. And we know which schools have the highest needs because we developed the Student Equity Needs Index in 2014. Our index is unique because we look beyond academic outcomes, like third grade math proficiency, and take a closer look at what students are facing in their communities to understand what is needed to level the academic playing field. We include indicators such as asthma rates and exposure to gun violence to get a clearer picture of the conditions that impact student learning. We all know that 2020 and 2021 have been years like no other, having tremendous impacts on our children and our schools. And so we layered the COVID-19 impact data on the index and showed that the schools identified as the highest need are also in communities hardest hit by the pandemic. And as we do in all our work, we made sure that the data matched with what the students and families were telling us, and this definitely did. As federal and state leaders were allocating billions of dollars for schools to deal with the impact of COVID, the Equity Alliance swung into action to make sure our kids got their equitable share of those funds. So we talked to district leaders, and our partners conducted listening sessions with students and families to learn about those experiences, and then the Equity Alliance drafted recommendations. And those recommendations were adopted by the school board as part of the Equity is Justice 2021 district policy passed in May of this year. This victory means that an extra $700 million every year will be allocated to the district's highest needs schools as identified by the Student Equity Needs Index. With this win, schools serving communities like Watts, Boyle Heights, and South LA will be able to provide student support services such as social workers, intervention coordinators, early childhood programs, and improve instruction to support learning. This victory was possible because of the leadership of LA Unified Board President Kelly Gomez and board members Tanya Ortiz Franklin, Monica Garcia, Nick Melvoin, and former student board member Kamari Brown. We are so grateful to them and to our Equity Alliance partners and the many youth and parent leaders who have tirelessly stepped up to meet the urgent needs of our low-income children and our students across LA. And we are so grateful to you. Your support ensures that we have the freedom to quickly respond to the needs of our students and their families. And we thank you so much.
What an incredible afternoon this has been. Doesn't hearing from these leaders just fill you with hope for the future? And who amongst us can't do with a little more hope? So many thank yous as we close out our program. First, let's start with big thanks to Sandra and Kimberly for sharing the groundbreaking work they are doing in the Central Valley. And congratulations to them on this well-deserved honor. Thank you, thank you. And to our labor partners who joined us this afternoon, thank you for giving our movement a strong call to action. You have reminded us that we must all support essential workers who make our society function. Thank you, thank you. And our amazing staff, kudos to you for your outstanding victories to move public dollars into the equity column and to ensure that political participation results in true representation. Thank you. And to the multi-talented Kenneth Cole, AKA K. Sankofa, thank you for sharing your artistry with us tonight. Thank you. Tonight's event was made possible by the dedication of our development and communications teams and our tech partners at Mobion. Let's give them a big virtual round of applause. And most importantly, thanks to you for joining today and for the work you do to make California a better place, a healthier place, a safer place for everyone. And if you haven't already, please be sure to follow us on social media and sign up for our monthly e-newsletter. And don't forget, it's never too late to donate and add to the momentum. We look forward to seeing all of you in person, fingers crossed, at next year's Champions for Equity Awards. Thank you again for your support of Advancement Project California, and have a great night.